design.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Talking about preserving.
It's our first, yeah.
Like the tree
Pearl,
preservation.
Well, I think you're
Like,
right.
that has biophilia impacts.
Okay, good evening, everybody. We're recording now. Welcome to the February 28th Long Range Planning Committee meeting. This will be covering the preliminary 2023-24 CPHD Planning Division Work Program. That's our agenda, our sole agenda tonight. Now, the stuff we always have to go through before we start these meetings. This is a public meeting. We're holding this hybrid public meeting, which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7th, 2022. Do we at this point have any planning commissioners who are attending remotely? Haven't seen any. If you do, raise your hand right now. Okay, that helps. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will be run. Members of the public may attend this meeting both here and in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the LRPC web pages, county's events calendar, and the email notification sent to the LRPC Zoco email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. Since none of our planning commissions are joining virtually, we don't have to go into that. For our attendees using Microsoft Teams.
We have Commissioner.
Oh, Commissioner Peterson, I see you are remote. Okay, so we will go back and do that. If you lose internet connectivity during the meeting, please reconnect by phone. During the meeting, please keep your phone and devices muted until you're called upon and turn off the sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For those using Microsoft Teams, turn off your video feed, and I'll address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a moment. The meeting chat is active for two purposes: for participants who need technical assistance and for other attendees to pose brief clarifying questions to the larger audience. While these will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may address these comments as appropriate. The Teams chat should not be used for the discussion or for any inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment will still need to do so at the end of this meeting, as the chat will not serve that opportunity. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. And I remind everybody in the room to speak up, speak slowly, and speak clearly, and to the microphones which are hanging down from the ceiling here, to allow anybody who's participating virtually to hear you clearly. For planning commissioners, those who are participating virtually who wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the meeting, please turn your video feed on and raise your virtual hand in Teams. If I don't notice it, staff will. They will monitor that as an indication that you'd like to speak. Other notes to members of the public, if there are any here who'd like to provide feedback and comment. This is not a public hearing, unlike our planning commission regular meetings. A public's comment is at the LRPC chair's discretion. After the committee discussion is concluded, we will have the opportunity for public comment tonight. You'll be called on to speak at the end of the meeting if you've registered in the chat to speak of tonight's agenda item. Speaking time allotted will depend on the number of speakers we have this evening. It's usually around 2 minutes. I'll call for speakers at the end of the meeting, and I'll ask Ms. Chowdhury here to let me know if we have any virtual attendees who would like to provide a comment. She will acknowledge any speakers in the Teams chat. Please indicate in the chat if you'd like to provide comment, and your name will be added to the list of speakers. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by the in-person attendees. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that's located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You have to do it yourself, but you will be muted when your time has concluded after the 2 Lastly, by the way, as an alternative, public comment is available and may be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC webpage. Finally, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the county's website. All information associated with tonight's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. Thank you. That concludes the preliminaries. And now, let's just go around the room to see who's here. By the way, I haven't noticed that Commissioner Peterson is walking over. Why don't we start with our star of the evening?
Thank you, Jim. Good evening, Anthony Busarelli, Planning Director here with Arlington.
James Schroll, Planning Commission.
Elizabeth Garrett, Planning Commission.
Leah Bagley, Planning Commission.
Chris Cryer, Supervisor, Urban Design Section.
Jennifer Smith, Comprehensive Planning Manager.
I'm Aaron Schreiber, I'm the current planning manager.
Anika,
Leo Sarley with the planning commission.
Anika Chattery, LRPC Board.
Okay, thank you. And now why don't we just get right into the meeting, which means I turn it over to Mr. Fusarelli, the Planning Director, to give his presentation.
Thank you, Jim. Good evening, everyone, and thanks again for being here tonight and allowing us to present to you all the preliminary draft work program for 2023 and 2024. This is the best way to. So while we see if we can get this displayed a little larger.
You maybe?
That's great. No.
Just please, Commissioner Weir is also on the line now.
All right. Thank you. So just for introductory purposes, this year's approach to presenting and discussing the work program is slightly different from years past. In particular, in terms of how we are engaging the county board. Most years in the past, there's been a separate work session exclusively on the CPHD Planning Division work program for the year ahead and beyond. And then there's been a separate budget work session with the board, typically focusing on CPHD's budget and also often in tandem with community planning, housing, and development in tandem with DHS or Department of Human Services. This year, the approach is going to vary in that the work program materials will be presented or included in the materials going to the county board for that budget work session, which just for informational purposes is on the afternoon of March 9th. And then there will be some time set aside during the 3-hour work session itself for that presents an opportunity for conversation, discussion, or questions about the content and information in the work program materials. So something slightly different from what we typically do in years past. I think there's a variety of reasons for that. One of the key reasons from our perspective that this would be a feasible approach, particularly this year, is the content we're about to walk through is largely an update from last year's work program. I think as we go through this evening, you'll see a lot of projects, a lot of initiatives that were also on the work program last year, but there have been meaningful and significant updates as it relates to status, as it relates to timing, and timing of work that will be upcoming. So with that framing, we're happy to be here tonight to really share what our current thinking is before the budget work session with the board on March 9th. We have a relatively streamlined presentation also compared to previous years. focusing in on the core of our work, and look forward to addressing any questions and taking any comments or feedback that you all need. So just an agenda for what we're about to cover this evening, a more focused set of materials, beginning with a look at the planning division organization, quickly sharing 6 core considerations that really helped influence and shape the formulation of the proposed work program for this year into next. Then we'll take a look at the status of development review, what we're currently seeing and what we anticipate seeing in development pipeline, as well as some work in progress we will be making on procedural and regulatory improvements. We'll transition to long-range planning and growth management priorities and studies underway. That will take us then to zoning studies that are on in our work program, as well as finally closing out, looking at a number of long-range planning efforts, similar items that others across the organization are doing that are not being led by the planning division, but for which we often provide coordination and a level of support. So starting with the organization, depicted here really is the structure and personnel comprising the planning division in community planning, housing, and development. So as I think all of you know, the division itself is one of 6 divisions within CPHD. And as a division, we are organized among 3 core sections or teams. We have the current planning team, managed by Aaron Schreiber, with further support for the site plan team within that arm provided by section supervisor Matt Pfeiffer. We also have comprehensive planning, managed by Jennifer Smith, with additional support for the comprehensive planning work within that group of section supervisor Kelly Brown. And within urban design, we have a team that provides an array of support to both current and comp planning, as well as many others beyond the division and the department. And that team is led by section supervisor Chris Kreider. All of us are able to stay on track to the best of our ability in large part to the great admin support we get from Joanne Harrison, as a management specialist, as well as Gisela Johnson, who many of you know as in her role as planning commission clerk, supporting the work of this commission. I will note, and it may be possible to pick up here, when at full strength, we currently have 30 full-time positions, FTEs, in the division. At this moment in time, we have 4 vacancies spread across current planning and comprehensive planning. We are actively working to fill 3 of those vacancies. There's ebb and flow. I think it's just part of the natural ebb and flow that we experience over time as an organization. And so we're very excited to complete those recruitment processes and get some new team members on board. There is an associate planner position in the comprehensive planning team that we are not progressing to fill because that is a proposed cut as part of the county manager's fiscal 24 budget. So if the county board approves or adopts the budget as currently proposed, we would effectively lose 1 FTE in the comprehensive planning section, bringing us down to 29. That is where we are as an organization. As far as work program considerations, a lot of thought and a lot of inputs in terms of framing how we identify, select, prioritize the proposed work we intend and will take on in the year ahead. These are, I think, 6 of perhaps perhaps the most critical considerations that really influence the work that you see here. We have a lot of non-discretionary work, and in this year in particular, as it relates to development review, whether it's site plans or use permits, admin change requests. So we need to process and review that work in a timely fashion. We also have a number of important long-range planning studies and efforts actively underway, and seeking to prioritize the completion of those ongoing studies is also an important consideration. A key message of, I think, the work program as it was shared last year really calls for increased focus on undertaking more future zoning studies. As we move forward, as we start to wind down some of these long-range planning efforts and we regain some capacity, focusing more of that capacity on zoning studies to really help get our regulations really current with the visions that are set forth in our various long-range plans. The importance of racial equity and applying a racial equity lens to all the work that we do, how we select that work or how we propose the work that you see here in the work program, and then the process and outcomes associated with that work is something that we're continuing to apply on a more consistent basis, as well as additional training at the staff level across the organization on racial equity will help strengthen our ability to do so. The fifth point, I think, is clearly a point that you all have experienced on the Planning Commission in particular. Since September 1st, the transition to hybrid meetings, really, I think there's been a lot of benefit, but a lot of challenges, or at least a lot of additional time, energy, and resources necessary to do hybrid engagement in an effective and successful fashion. So that, I think, is just an important acknowledgement piece that gets factored into the work we're proposing to take in the year ahead, and just understanding that things like creating and adopting rosters for individual subgroups, while it's beneficial to the commission to maximize virtual participation, there's a cost associated with that in terms of both on the commission side and on the staff. And then finally, I think a really important part of the consideration for this year is something that was noted on last year's work program, which is the comprehensive plan review. Now, we just brought to the commission in January, they accepted the 5-year look back of amendments and updates. And this piece of it is really what we had been referring to as phase 2, but it's really just a future-looking, a forward-looking review of over the next 5 years, where are the areas of the comprehensive plan that we want to prioritize and pursue updates. So we're really excited about prioritizing that body of work this year. Moving into development review, recognizing that text is so small, you can't necessarily see the individual names of the projects, but I think the broader message is there's a lot of lines of text there, and there's a lot of projects. We did, with under Aaron's leadership and Matt Pfeiffer's support and the rest of the team on current planning, over the past year, 9 special exception projects, development projects were approved by the board. We had 2 of them just approved this month. When we take stock of where we are currently with the number of active site plan applications, those under preliminary review, the conceptual site plans, and the number of anticipated site plans, which are plans that we expect will come forward based on information from a variety of sources, we are looking at a total of close to 34 projects total combined. Now, will we see all of those come forward as site plans this year? Probably not. But if we don't see some of those this year, we'll probably see them next year at some point as well. And when you just do a year-over-year comparison, that same estimate would have sat at roughly 22 projects February of last year compared to 34 of this year. So looking at almost roughly a 50% increase. If all of these do materialize and we see them, that will create some challenges and opportunities in terms of how we staff the review of all that site plans, and we may need to look beyond the current planning team to provide additional support where needed, which may have some implications on other work that may not get done as. Also in the area of development review, a number of ongoing priorities on procedural and regulatory updates. So there's an important update with the leadership of Matt Pfeiffer in particular, getting the most recent set of the standard site plan conditions updated. Looking ahead to 2023, a number of additional important updates that we are excited about, including an update to the 4.1 administrative regulations document. Not so much partly in the arena of development review, but we are having ongoing discussions and options to refine how we approach the special glove study process, really coming out of some of the discussions, particularly with Courthouse West last year. There's been internal discussion, and both with certain applicants, on looking at flexibility for some of the select conditions in the standard set that in concept would entail more administrative flexibility on the timing of certain milestones and achievements as it relates to permitting. We can certainly get more into that if there's interest, but that just gives you an example of the type of, an additional type of improved alignment that we are looking at. I think commercial resiliency as an initiative has been something that the commission is pretty familiar with now through a number of zoning studies. So when we look at the major versus minor site plan amendment thresholds, as well as looking to achieve more consistency between site plan conditions for entitled projects or built projects and the policies of the retail plan from 2015, that also, those two items also fall within that larger umbrella of commercial resiliency and are things that we are looking to prioritize for this year. As resources and timing permits, also would like to undertake updates to the landscape standards, which may be a late 23 or early 24 endeavor. And then finally, temporary residential to hotel conversions, which certainly has been a topic of discussion in the past few years. This was an item where the budget, the board included some dollars for consultant support to assist the completion of this work sooner rather than later. We are still looking at beginning of the scoping of that work has not yet happened to date. And so at this point, that body of work would be looking for a target in 2020. In the category of ongoing work and priorities, just continued coordination on implementation and advancement of permit Arlington. Just this week, a big update with additional permit types, POs going live. I think that completes, and Aaron could correct me if I'm wrong, I think that completes the customer-facing portion of that body of work, which is a significant milestone and huge achievement. And then a lot of the work that staff on Aaron's team and Chris's team and Chris himself manage on a regular basis in terms of admin changes associated with development. And if anyone's wondering, there are not 45 slides here. There's really just 10. So just wanted to clarify that.
You want to shock us,
No. The long-range planning work, first of all, I think it's important to look back at doing some major sector plans or sector plan updates for really important plans or plan updates that are really helping to development review and public investments and improvements in those areas, as well as the completion of the Courthouse West Special Glove Study. Looking at 23, missing middle housing study, which the commission heard in December as an RTA, and we'll be hearing again next week for action. We will then be bringing to the board later in March for their consideration. Assuming the March timeframe for action, in the first quarter, we would be moving in the second quarter to endeavoring on some work to really get informational and permitting documents in place. It's currently stated in the staff report, our proposed effective date for expanded housing options development would be July 1. And so we would take the second quarter to get everything in before that July 1 go live. Also in the second quarter, we'll be bringing to the commission and board the 2000 North Glebe Road Special Glove Study. We are advancing work on the future of outdoor dining study, and so taking lessons learned from the TOSA program and updating our guidelines and aspirations, and ultimately some of our regulations for how we manage outdoor dining here in Arlington. As we look at the third quarter ahead, we see the plan Langston Boulevard, the plan itself, but also current thinking is the implementation to come forward with the plan. We have been having Jen and Natasha and others on the team have been thinking critically about how to bring both of those pieces together, and we are currently exploring options on what those tools look like, how we could leverage existing tools. So a bit more work to be done on that, but we are targeting Q3 for the plan to come forward to the commission and board for consideration, and our intentions are also with that implementation as well. Spoke a little earlier about the comprehensive plan review update, the forward-looking piece of it, building from the phase 1 review that we just completed. The Barcroft property or Barcroft track redevelopment, we have a team of staff continuing to work closely with housing and economic development and J.R. Lynch on really moving forward from the master financing and development plan that they submitted to the county last fall. But there's two components and really two areas of work that we're coordinating with them on. Part of it is their long-range planning for the overall property and where do they see conservation happening and preservation and with renovation, and where they see infill or redevelopment opportunity. So we will be undertaking significant work on both the renovation and the redevelopment side with J.R. Lynch and the rest of that team as they are ready and when they are ready to move forward in doing so. So we've got that as an important body of work in 2023 and then beyond into 24. A couple studies listed here. I'm sorry. First, one study that has been sort of temporarily on hold for a few months has been the multifamily reinvestment study and potential zoning ordinance amendments. This grew out of the Housing Conservation District work. This really is looking at the RA districts through much of the county. So we are excited about the opportunity to revive that work later this year as we regain some capacity and resources after completing other projects. And then two studies that are really TBD, or two buckets of work that are TBD, the Crystal City Building Heights study, which is also it's been on hold for a few months on the public-facing engagement side. That really, at this point, is sort of a TBD in terms of target completion. And while the special bluff studies, we have 2 of them currently in Tier 2Q with 2300 South Eads and Melwood. While it's listed as TBD, I think our recent practice, and Jen can correct me, has been that we would initiate the next special bluff study upon completion of the one prior. So that's just a little bit more info behind the team. Moving to the zoning studies, several key zoning elements were approved or completed in 2022. 2 of them really were the implementation supporting the adopted plans for Pentagon City and Clarendon. And the first batch, if you would, of commercial market resiliency zoning approved in 4th quarter of last year with the permitting work on micro-fulfillment centers. Looking at this year, I've already received board adoption or approval of the 2nd batch of commercial resiliency back in January. In March, the stormwater management and public spaces master plan implementation number 1 will be coming back to the commission next Monday, before going back to the board for action later in the month. And then looking at 2nd quarter, some additional commercial resiliency, commercial market resiliency uses and zoning ordinance amendments on target for indoor recreation and for a collection. An advertisement is advancing for a collection of other uses within that larger umbrella, such as flex R&D, shared kitchens, ghost kitchens, food delivery, etc. So, and though not listed on this slide, there may be additional commercial market resiliency zoning studies that may emerge and after they're identified later. As we complete the policy and guideline work on the future of outdoor dining study, we anticipate there will need to be certain zoning amendments to support the implementation of that work. So that is on here as well. In addition to the 2nd phase of public space master plan. So just a little bit more info on the public spaces master plan, which last year was presented, I think, in one category, with an acknowledgement that it could be phased. As Jen, Nick, and the team, as we work with DPR staff, really gotten more detailed in terms of the phasing of that work in the individual components. So the 2nd phase for later this year would really look at providing a use permit flexibility mechanism for parks, the way that the APS has had one for school facilities for the past few years, before getting to the 3rd phase of PSMP work we'll talk to shortly. But that is here as well, in addition to a few other technical corrections and zoning map corrections and updates. Those are items that are being led in part from the zoning district, at least on the zoning division on the technical corrections side. And I should also mention that while listed here, the commercial market resiliency work is listed here. That work continues to be led primarily through a partnership from the Director's Office of Community Planning, Housing, and Development, as well as Arlington Economic Development. We do have Aaron, we do have Nick, and others who are supporting that work from planning, but they are not leading that work directly. And this next slide is really partly unscheduled zoning studies, and then partly zoning studies that are preliminary thinking would target these for really the 2024 to 2025 timeframe. The Child Care Initiative Phase 2. This is another body of work for which this year's budget, there were consultant dollars included to help advance this work. So we are now discussing with Department of Human Services staff and other partners internally what the scoping of that study should really focus on, where are the greatest opportunities and biggest benefit. The third category of the public spaces master plan really is intended to be more of a comprehensive update of how the zoning ordinance could be structured to help the management of parks as a land use in 2024, as opposed to, I think, a 1950s construct, which DPR, our partners in Parks and Recreation, are often challenged with a zoning ordinance that perhaps was structured around parks in a different era. And so, related to, not to parks as much, but to the another important category of public facilities or public lands is what we call the public district modernization. And so this really would be additional zoning work that supports DES, in large part DES operations, their operational needs, their essential services, to ensure that they can continue to support the county on the limited land that they have available for them to do so. And then without reading through each of these, a lot of these zoning studies here may look familiar to you, as they were all included in last year's work program as well. And many of them continue to be noted with a TBD for more specific schedules to be noted or determined in the future. And then finally, the last slide here is probably not a fully exhaustive list of planning initiatives that are currently being led or soon to be led by others outside of the planning division. So whether it's DPR leading the Forestry and Natural Resources Plan, our partners in Historic Preservation bringing forward an update to that plan, and as another example shown here, the Master Transportation Plan update, which has not yet commenced, but has been identified as something, an update that will be initiated in the near future. These just represent a number of other important long-range planning works or program policy updates, again, being led by others. But I think it's safe to say that our team provides a level of support and, importantly as well, coordination for some of these items. With that, that concludes, I think, the overview presentation, and happy to address any questions here along with the team, and yeah, welcome any feedback and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Pizzarelli. So it's now open to the committee, and Commissioner Scholl is first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Pizzarelli, thanks for walking through that presentation, and I'm glad staff's here, so thank you for all being here as well. A few kind of reactions, I guess. Just a couple quick comments and then a couple questions for you. Your slide 3, which has up the org chart, I don't know if you're intending to share any of this with the board or in other public meetings, but it's not readable at any distance, unfortunately. And so I would suggest, perhaps remaking that slide, if you are intending to use that. It's good to hear that you're, while this is up, that you're trying to fill those vacancies. I know staff capacity is often an issue and one that we're not always as familiar with, so it's good that you're filling those. That's great. Also, on things that I'm happy to see, good to see that the temporary hotel conversion is on the work plan, so that's great to see as well. With respect to some of the long-range work, mentioned the refinements to the special club studies. I'm wondering if you could kind of, and I know that's future work, but I was wondering if you can elaborate what your current thinking is about what that study might entail and what your kind of initial conversations have been about what potential changes might occur to the special lump study process.
Certainly. I might start with sort of a high level and ask Jen or Kelly to add additional thoughts. But I think really, I think the fundamental question that we've heard in response to some of the recent special glove studies has been partly the level of time, but also the level of detail associated with the documents that are sort of the output or the deliverable of the special glove study. And I think it raises the question of should that level of intense resource and time and detail be undertaken for a specific site, and then further have that like adopted as policy for a specific site. And I think we certainly heard some comments and perspectives on the challenges associated with special glove studies when they're focused on a single site as opposed to a larger area. But that said, one of the, I think, things we've been thinking about has been, are there instances in where a special glove study would be appropriate or necessary, and perhaps other instances where it might not, right? Where we perhaps can go back to an approach before the 2007 or 2008 resolution to really decouple them. So that's, I think, hopefully a high level kind of, start to a response. I might ask Jen or Kelly if either of them might want to share just a little bit more information on some of our current thinking, recognizing no decisions have yet been made, but we will be advancing that work shortly.
Sure. Kelly, I'll get started and you can jump in after me. But, I think that we want to be continuing to think about how we can conduct these studies and at least have an opportunity for dialogue on the preferred land use vision before, perhaps before we see the, fully the details of an application. But, continuing to think about how we can do that in a way where, we aren't waiting multiple years, to get to studies. And I think that that's, just like what Anthony had mentioned, in terms of we're looking at primarily whether the land use plan should change or not. Do we need to get into as deep of a set of information and details as we have in some of our past processes on a specific site? So while I think that there's great interest in that, that's something that we are continuing to explore in terms of how can we conduct our processes, get feedback from community members through the LRPC venue, and really be thinking about the sort of the higher level policy land use guidance. And perhaps we are signaling some additional detail on some key components of what we would be looking for from a project, but may not again go as deep as say an 80 to 90 page report. So one of the things that we are continuing to explore is how can we streamline our reporting mechanism, being conscientious in terms of what information and discussions are occurring with LRPC. We're trying to be efficient in our meetings, and that's helpful having good partnership with you as we go through the LRPC meetings. Those are just a few examples. And Kelly, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add.
I think you all covered what I was going to share. So happy to follow up if there's other questions.
Yeah, so that's helpful, everybody. So maybe a little bit of feedback as you go into that study. One is, I think it's important that we're conveying consistency in this approach across the county. And I think one of the things that's been tough is there has been, I think, an internal shift within CPHD about how you might want to change these studies going forward. But that hasn't completely materialized until an outward shift about how we're communicating that. That's one. Second, if you do want to make these processes quicker, then I think it's incumbent on staff to be developing the tools, resources, communications tools to really communicate what's a special club study, what are we talking about in these that we aren't talking about at SPRC, and that's staff's job, I think. And the Planning Commission can help in that, and the Planning Commission sharing those meetings. But I think the staff presentations I think really need to hammer home that. Margaret and others who are doing these studies have done a great job of that. But I just don't think that there's the timeline piece or like the flow chart diagrams. I think things like that can really help communicate. And hopefully that can be part of that. I guess another question on this is, are you at all thinking that changes to special glove studies could free up staff time for other long-range planning along the corridor, updating outdated sector plans, looking at the bullseye? I mean, is that part of where you're going potentially, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes in part, right? So we recognize that the amount of staff time and resources invested in a special glove study is probably more than it needs to be in most instances, right? So I think trying to get to a place where we're spending an appropriate amount of time on the question of what is the appropriate land use designation for a particular site, especially when it's coming forward in the context of a development application. Our goal would be to right-size that process, and in the process of doing that, free up staff capacity to do any number of things, right? And whether it's the few examples that you just spoke to in terms of, the next study of Ballston, however that may be scoped, or reconsidering both the bullseye versus the spine development model. I think those are a couple of things that we would actually plan to spotlight or explore as part of the comp plan review. Like in terms of looking ahead over the next 5 years, like the development model in terms of bullseye versus spine might be something that is like identified coming out of that as something we want to prioritize to inform the future work program. But whatever it is partly driven by the desire to spend the limited staff resources we have on the work that I think is most impactful and appropriate for the charge.
That's fair. I mean, it's good to hear that you're thinking about that along the corridor and other ways to try to be efficient. I mean, I think staff is going to be spending its time on special glove studies unless along the corridor, unless you're updating the plans. So you're going to be spending the time regardless. You can just either spend it on one block or 2 blocks, or you can spend it on a broader area. And Anthony's heard me, everybody's here around this table has heard me yell about the Ballston sector plan forever, so won't reveal that background. Last question, Mr. Chairman, if you might, is about the Crystal City building height study. I was wondering maybe if you could provide an update on why it was put on hold, and it seems like we were nearing the end of that study, and we are seeing other projects that in that area that could benefit from that height, but if you could maybe provide an update there, it would be helpful.
Sure, and on this one, I might actually ask either Jen or Kelly if they wanted to take the lead and add as needed, if there's any additional perspectives.
Sure. So many of you may be aware that we initiated this study, I guess probably a few years ago now at this point. And some of that was really at the request of at least one developer, indicating that they had some interest in surpassing the building height levels under the sector plan. And we really had some mixed review, but there was some reinforcement from the board that they were interested in us, taking a look at that. So we initiated the study, and obviously there was some analysis done. And I think we had gone through a couple of LRPC meetings and had a launch point, if you will, when we got to a certain point that we said, okay, geographically, we have a sense of, where we would be interested in additional height. There was some methods that were explored and discussed for that. And it became a point where staff, could turn our attention to figure out, okay, how would we effectuate that? And we needed to pause some of that work, given staff resources. Some of the staff that had focused on this focused on the Courthouse West Special Glove study, so it had been on hold. And it was only just, recently that we are, continuing to kind of pick this back up and look at, how can we resume the work, think about an approach. The work is, quite complex, given the nature of the sector plan, and it's not as density numeric driven, it's form driven. There were a lot of basis for design guidelines built into that sector plan. So how does additional height work within form driven with some parameters? And we're now talking about additional density. There was some exploration of how do we keep density being net neutral. That was another factor that had been discussed with LRPC. All that to say, again, moving forward, at this moment in time, we've also lost a resource. Some of you may have known that Tim Murphy left and he had been on point working on this. So thinking about staff resources, thinking about how can we bring forward this work with a fair amount of complexity still to it. And, we've also, had some shifts in interest as well. So we're just continuing to think about, is this the study that we can prioritize at this moment in time? Staff is really deployed on a lot of, a number of other processes right now. And, right now we're thinking that, for those reasons and less interest and less pressure from the development community is now the right time to really, push forward for this, or is it something that we can, put as a future effort? So,
Yeah.
Anthony, I don't know if there's anything more that you want to.
No, I mean, I think you covered it well. I mean, I would underscore, at the risk of being redundant, like the complexity of solving. So I appreciate, the sense, I think, from you and from others perhaps, that it seemed like the study was almost done. And I would agree. I think my understanding is I think there was a strong sense of like a good direction forward. And I think the challenge was that next step was for staff to kind of go back and figure out the mechanics of how we actually operationalize and update the implementation framework to support that vision. And, having some familiarity with the sector plan itself, I mean, I appreciate the challenges of taking just building height as one, planning component, sort of in isolation, and then trying to, do what sort of Jen just described in terms of continue to realize a number of goals and balance the overall structure. So that's, I think, the only thing to add. Plus, the interest piece of it there too is, the site that was really the reason for this study to be undertaken. We may see an application sometime in 23 for that site, and it may actually be at a building height that is well below what maybe was envisioned or perhaps even allowed for this site.
Yeah, so maybe that's very helpful context about the kind of background and the precipitating site. But maybe some thoughts here, and then I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. One is, there was a ton of community time that was spent, and then it's kind of radio silence. Like there wasn't any follow-up to say, we're putting this on hold, this is why, we're moving staff resources around, right? And so I think you need to close the loop with people. Also, I understand the staff resources move and need to cover other things. But it's been over a year since this concluded, I led some of these LRPC meetings, and as LRPC chair, I've been LRPC chair in over a year, so I think longer than that. So I think there's the communications piece, and if you pick it up again at any point, I don't think at that point you can rely on the initial meetings you did a couple of years ago. I think you need to start over again, a little bit, and say with the community outreach and the education about why you're doing the study and stuff. I don't think, if 2 or 3 years have gone by, you can just expect that everybody remembers everything that they did in 2019. So, or whatever it was, 2020. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that feedback, and we'll take it back. The 2 points, one, I could use a refresher in terms of if and how we communicated out sort of the current status of that study, and that right now there isn't forward momentum. And Kelly, if there's something that I'm not remembering that, we informed that we sent that communications out, please chime in. But I do think that the other piece of it if and when we do pick that work back up, I think your point's well taken. We may want to think about, are there creative ways in which we can, could staff put together a video recorded presentation or something that just reorients and refreshes everyone to what the study was about, the work that was accomplished, that, doesn't require another meeting for everyone to kind of, gather around a room just to be reminded. But I think we can certainly explore, options that might help address some of the feedback.
Yeah, I don't want to micromanage how you do that. Something. All right.
Yeah, I
want
to associate myself with Commissioner Schroll's comments on this, because the LRPC, special clubs are proliferating, and they're in planned areas where that was never envisioned that special clubs were going to be there. And come back to, we have planned areas that are way out of date, and that's what's forcing this to happen. I think it's just going to keep gaining more and more momentum because these plans are so old that conditions have changed, and not surprisingly. And not surprisingly, property owners are going to come in and want to say, well, I want something different, and they're going to be applying for special clubs. And as Commissioner Schroll said, it's just going to snowball. So we really need to get ahead of that and put the special clubs back to where they vision for the unplanned area. Even those being chair of LRPC, I can see now. When you go to the unplanned areas, the communities there have no idea what these are about. They have no understanding what a tier 1 is and a tier 2 is. I've had to spend a good amount of time sitting down with people and say, this is what it is and this is what it isn't, and they still don't trust it, they don't believe it, they want to get into SBRC type stuff. So it's a very frustrating process. It takes a lot of work, not just from you, but from us too, in order to get the communities to fully appreciate and understand what's going on. Anyway, that's an internal comment on that. I have a whole bunch of things here, but I want to hear from others. Are any of the other commissioners? First, I guess Commissioner Guerin and Commissioner Peterson. And there's something? Commissioner Bagley?
Not you.
Okay, then her. Okay, one by one. Commissioner Guerin.
Thank you. I am also happy to see some of the things on here that we've raised over the years, like the update to S3A and the Y Hotel, the residential conversions to hotel. I would like to ask that we do get some guidance on that before we see another one of those. Our last one we had was very frustrating for us to see. I concur with the global refinements, but I feel like with the way we've done gloves has changed over the last few years, and it feels like several years ago, we really were focused more on what might be appropriate for the site, and somehow the developers seem to have had a larger and larger position in these discussions, so that it does end up being more like a pre-SPRC. And I'm wondering if that's making it a little bit more complicated as well. The last 2 points I have are related to each other. One was a question about staff changes, because there are some names I don't see up on the chart, and I'm surprised by that. And then having to do with updates. So there's a lot of things that are proposed to come forward on here. Landscaping update, the residential conversion guidance, Plan Langston. So it'd be helpful for us, I think, to know when there are changes that are made or when there are updates, because we'll get questions from the community. And if Michael Cullen is not working for the county anymore, I'm still getting questions from the neighbors, even though the Y is on hold. I had asked Michael to be the point of contact. I don't want to misrepresent anything. But to find out now is a little bit frustrating for me. I've been suggesting to people, you need to run that through Michael. As I understand it, that's on hold. So that's where I am on that.
Can I just respond to that? I think that's a really fair comment, and I think we can, I mean, we went a long while with, I think, really strong stability and little, if any, change in division. And as mentioned earlier, just with ebb and flow, we have had some recent changes. We can absolutely consider how to better communicate or more timely communicate that to the commission.
I sure didn't know either.
Well, Michael's last day with planning was last Friday. He has taken an opportunity with the Department of Parks and Recreation, so he is, at least, for anyone contacting him, his email and phone still work, but we should have gotten ahead of that in terms of, providing you with an updated contact, sooner than we are.
Well, understanding that it was Friday, I can appreciate why that didn't happen. I think I just want to take a moment also to reflect. When I started on the Planning Commission, my sense was that we didn't have the somewhat more collegial relationship that we have with staff now. And I really would like to see that continue going forward. We have a much younger Planning Commission now, people who can't always they don't always have the time to come to every meeting or do the deep read. So we're relying more on staff and seeing that more of a partnership. So I guess I want to stress that's the underlying reason why I'd like to see some of this happen, but trust that you will find the right way to do it. Thanks.
Peterson.
I also had a few questions. The first was about, you mentioned, and I apologize if I got this wrong since I came in late. You used to have a separate planning meeting, but now you're doing that planning meeting as part of the budget review. Is that right?
For this year, yeah, there was most previous years there was a work session specifically focused on the planning division work program, and in addition to the budget work session.
Okay.
This year, there's going to be some time carved out of the budget work session, I think, really to allow the board to engage with staff and commission leadership on questions or comments related to materials that we send out as read aheads.
So just, is that a little bit confusing for the community if the budget sessions are based on the fiscal year and this work is based on the calendar year? And so there might be like a 6-month overlap of like, oh, well, this money actually isn't related to that work because it's a different fiscal year, or you think that's not?
I mean, I can't say it won't be confusing to anybody in the community, but I think that anyone who's been sort of following, work of the planning division over years and, what is included in a work program, we frame it as a fiscal year or 1.5 year time frame. But a lot of the work, doesn't get completed in a single fiscal year, right? But I view it, at least, personally, as the perspective I apply is, what is the prioritization that we'll be spending the next 12 to 18 months really focusing in on either work leading, concluding, wrapping up, or what's the next up priority? What is that next project that we really need to initiate? As it ties exactly to the start and end of the fiscal year, I don't think is a detail that, at least from our perspective, is all that important.
Okay. And then I saw your very long list of projects that we have. I'm very familiar with the SPRCs. And then that kind of being paired with and we're losing an FTE. So are you able to communicate to the county manager and to the county board, this loss of a person actually translates to less work getting done, or asking the colleagues of that person to do even more work? And then how do you address burnout? And I guess when you're losing that person, how do you make sure the county knows that look, you asked everybody to make cuts. This person's really going to hurt maybe more than a different department. Are you talking to FAC? Because sometimes they'll advocate if they think that a cut doesn't make sense.
All good questions. Certainly in the conversations that our director and that I've been part of with our county manager, there's an understanding, right? There is a body of work on an annual basis that one FTE is, this case in the planning division, accomplish. You lose that FTE, you lose that capacity. So I think there is an understanding that it just means, some work might not get done, or some work might take longer to get done, or we might have to wait longer to begin the next work. So much of our work, though, is, it's based and it's group work, that it's the direct impact of that losses, I think, is a little bit more challenging to just clearly depict because of the nature of the teams and the groups within which we accomplish our work. We recognize it's a difficult budget year, and we recognize that, we're not the only ones that are facing the prospect of the cut, and if that cut happens, we're presenting a work program that we think is generally in alignment with that, and we need to further adjust that. That's something that we.
Yeah, I just find that always very frustrating because I've always viewed CPHD as actually a profit center for the county. By somebody not being there, project getting delayed, one of the project at a Crystal City role, Carter here, if it's delayed by 6 months, taxes that are foregone by not having that project done more than pays for one FTE. These are very, very significant projects along here. Work that doesn't get done really does directly translate into the variables. So, personally, I always look at it that way. It's maybe a little mercenary, but I think it's a reality that's there. Anyway, Commissioner Bagley, you're next.
Going back to the study things, it's been difficult sometimes when we are doing a GLUF study and the developer's plans are already out there. And it just lends itself to becoming a little bit more of an SPRC when you're in that situation. I don't know, and this is just observation, but I don't know if there's something that you can do in the process so that it's not happening like that. And again, I don't need an answer for that today. It just makes it difficult. The first one that I sat through, some people in the community knew, other people were like, I didn't know there was a plan out there. Where do I find it? And then you couldn't find it so much. So it doesn't make people feel good that they're really part of a process if there's already a plan out there and then they're just there. Now, I will say there's some plus and minuses. Yes, sometimes when the GLUP turns into an SPRC, on the other end of that, by the time you get to the SPRC, a lot of the stuff has already been done. And you're not arguing all that stuff. There is a community disengagement, however, and I've noticed it, going back to GLUP studies that I had to sit through as a community member. When you get to the GLUP part, you've got all these things, you spent all your time, you've given up your life and your part-time stuff to go and do that. When you get to the next process, half the notes don't actually get there. It's not part of maybe there should be a video for that when you get to LRPC or something, just to say so that, there's different planning commissioners that sit on all of these. So if you're lucky, one of the projects that we had in my neighborhood, she had sat through the whole process. So the notes that, all of us had killed ourselves on, and especially some of the neighbors who were directly impacted, really felt like, what the heck, until she said some of the things that carried it forward. So I think in the process of this, if we can, as we're looking at all of this, and I don't think it's necessarily a huge amount of money or a huge amount of time or whatever, but just from a community standpoint, if we're getting people to be engaged, you don't really want them, and some of them get so frustrated by change and whatever, you really don't want them to feel as though all the hours that they spent on phase 1 doesn't get to phase 2 and then phase 3 maybe forgotten, maybe not remembered or whatever. So just some observations that as you're in this that we think about.
No, thank you for sharing that. We can factor that into the thought work.
I was wondering, looking at your kind of list of priorities, how often do those priorities change with like new county board members? We have 2 county board members that are planning to leave. Board member Crystal had the child care initiative, and that's kind of on your list. So if she's leaving and a new person comes in, it's like, I am more interested in a different type of project. How often does that kind of get swapped out? And then also when there's a big community priority that you all spend a lot of time and effort and work on, like the accessory dwellings, and then, it doesn't pan out the way that you want it to. And then you have this review that's like a to be confirmed, but like you've already done so much work on the original project and got, that it was a contentious issue in the community, I understand, but it was pre my being on the commission. So then maybe just like a little bit more fine tuning to make it work a little bit better, but it's kind of like on the to be confirmed. So I'm kind of thinking about missing middle, like so much effort, so much work right now, maybe a few things need to be improved on. We learn that after 2 years, but the like phase 2 part of missing middle also just ends up being like on the to be confirmed, like for years and years and years. So like, how do you make sure to keep the momentum going for something that you all worked so hard on to like make sure that like it gets perfected kind of in kind of review processes and stage 2s?
No, thanks for both of those. I mean, I think on the first one, I might ask others on my team to see if they recall like really clear examples, but I think that I can't recall a specific instance where, a board member kind of stepping off the board and then having that seat filled by a new board member has immediately and drastically resulted in a shift in priorities. I think that in our conversations with the board, it's, all 5 board members together. And so, that one board member has 4 other colleagues, and they together are really, I think, helping to guide and direct and inform some of the prioritization that we do on an annual basis. So I think that's, probably just a high level kind of answer to that particular question. I think you raise a good point about, where we are with missing middle and the potential implementation that will be considered by the commission and board in March, and then what happens next. Accessory dwellings is an interesting example. I will just note that with accessory dwellings, in addition to the original approval in the late 2000s, there have been, Jen, I believe, 2 rounds of amendments that have further, and both of those, were partly, the objective was to kind of address key issues, but then also in the process, they further built in more flexibility and allowed more opportunity for accessory dwellings to be realized. And I think with the third one that I think was approved in 19, with that one in particular, we've seen a big uptick because that was the amendment that allowed new accessory dwellings to be built as detached buildings. And so we have had accessory dwellings on the list here.
Okay, so this is the 4th review.
This would be, and it almost, I think, might be viewed, and Jen or Kelly could correct me if needed, but it might be viewed as just something to, as an ongoing sort of parking lot item. And there may be a tie back to the affordable housing master plan. I don't recall, but that there was from an implementation standpoint, just something to continue to monitor. With expanded housing development that could be implemented beginning next month or July 1, we are having some pretty robust conversations about, the tracking and monitoring of that development. So we have equal, if not better, data on that than we did when we were beginning the beginning of stages of tracking accessory dwelling. So that together will help us, I think, any subsequent review of what's working, what could be improved, and then how do we know.
Anthony, I would just add to the question about different priorities. I think one of the things that you've talked about, given your ongoing conversations with leadership in the organization, is do we have capacity to take on things when they come up, and how they were derived. But I would say that the commercial market resiliency and the Barcroft opportunity that presented itself very recently were things that hadn't been on the work plan and were to some degree added by board direction, board interest, and some other things. So this is a very fulsome work plan, but, I think we are trying to be efficient where we can and knowing that, some things may come up that, we just don't know about sitting here, tonight. So I just wanted to add that.
I appreciate you noting that, and I'll just briefly make a tie back to it. And that is part of the reason why some of the other studies, in this case, like Crystal City Building Heights study, the pause on that, I think, is partly informed or influenced by the needed work, the necessary important work on Barcroft, which wasn't necessarily on our work program a year ago. So as priorities come up, there are implications because of the finite resources.
Commissioner Sarli, I'm going to take then Commissioner Dack.
I just wanted to associate myself with the special glove concern, it feels a little bit like it's a lacuna, right, that you're trying to fill in, and I think if we're aware that there's this planning need, right, we ought to plan so that it's sort of break glass in case of emergencies, right, and so I just really want to emphasize that and second that, and I won't add it. The one question I had was a little bit of a curiosity on the 34 projects that are coming up. Is that some sort of a lag? Is there like a reason for that that we're aware of? And is that what we should expect next year, or are we seeing some sort of a bubble?
As we know, Aaron, he's been chomping at the bit. CFP has perspectives based on his conversations. I think those are good questions that have come up in some of the previous discussions we've had about this, but Aaron, what insights might you have to offer?
You're right. It is a larger volume than what we're used to. I would say that all but 2 of those projects are residential. We have 1 office building, we have 1 institutional building. Everything else is all residential. Some are conversions of old office buildings that were approved, and residential is just the more pressing need. I think a lot of it is in reaction to what we've talked about a lot regionally is our housing needs and the desire to try and fill some of those opportunities here in Arlington. They are concentrated in the larger development markets, mainly in Crystal City, or even on some of the northern and western fringes of the Crystal City and Pentagon City areas, a little bit in Roslyn. They're big projects. Some of them also should be pretty familiar. They are old projects that have just come back to us in a bigger form. The Inn of Roslyn, the NSTA site, these are projects that have been around for a while, just haven't been built. They're getting bigger. I wouldn't expect this trend to continue too much longer because that's each of these projects, it's a significant amount of units that are going into the pipeline. How many of those are actually getting built? We're seeing them come pretty quickly, but that's a lot of units that we're tracking. I can't envision those all end up coming online in the next few years, but I would assume a lot of it is also dependent upon just the general conditions of the market. We know that Amazon's going to occupy Met Park in the next few months. When they turn their attention to Penn Place and how much they're actually going to occupy there, it's going to have a ripple effect on what's happening on the east side of Route 1 in Crystal City. So there's a backfill effect. And so a lot of it is going to be dependent upon how some of those trends continue. We cannot get through those 34 projects this year. We know that. There are some high priority projects in there that we know need to get through this year. And as you guys have talked about, we do have staffing resources. People are getting moved around a lot. We have some pretty talented associate planners who are stepping up and helping out a lot. But we're also reaching across to other areas and finding assistance if necessary.
And then Aaron, could I just one point on that too? Aaron, if memory serves me, I think a few years ago, part of our budgeting work leading into budget-related discussions, we did a 10-year look back. Mm-hmm. And I think, if I recall, and be curious if you remember differently, I think there was just natural, like there is with sort of our staffing over time, there's just natural ebb and flow. I don't think there was any consistency in terms of, a best fit average flatline for a similar number of applications. I think we had some years where they were really high, some years that were really low. And I would expect that, this number is just another kind of data point in that trajectory.
And then just to follow up, volume is, volume in applications is different from volume of application sizes. Penn Place got approved last year. I don't think we're going to do another 3 million square foot office project this year, or probably anytime soon. But that alone has such a dramatic effect on capacity. But still, a lot of these are the 150 to 200 unit residential buildings, and then you have the occasional 500 unit Crystal Plaza 5 type of project. They just take more time.
I have a quick follow-up. That brings me to a question on planning. Are we seeing a shift from like office construction to residential construction? And is that something that we need to be thinking about, or planning or readjusting anything about if we're seeing that trend?
I mean, I think maybe it's a different point, but I think as Aaron noted, like the majority of applications we're seeing are residential.
Right. So I'm wondering, is that typical? Are we seeing a shift towards more residential projects and less office space? I feel like in previous years we had more office towers and office development.
Okay.
This is
I
like.
feel like it, I mean,
planning.
feels like the trend, it's been a trend that we've been moving in this direction over the past few years. And then if you go back, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, it was more heavily weighted on the office side. But again, to Aaron's point, some of that was just because of like several like really large office proposals, right? Whether it was Rosslyn Plaza, and others in that time frame. I just think that part of it is where the office vacancies are currently, right? The north of 20%. Part of it is this uncertainty in terms of, return to the office, right? What is the future of the workplace? How many days a week are most employers, the typical employee going to be in an office? What does that translate into in terms of demand? And then we need more housing. We need more units, not just here in Arlington, but across the region. So I think it's a combination of things. I don't think we're too concerned about that, and I think we actually have, I think, the good work, Aaron, others on the team, working in partnership with economic development. Some of the administrative guidance that was developed a few years ago on the consideration of office conversions for other uses, I think was a really important foundation to sort of reinforce, like, where are the locations where office is really important in our plans and we want to bring it, and then where can we be more flexible in terms. Really important question. Thank you.
I have a couple, and then go to Commissioner Garen. First, I want to acknowledge that both Chair Patel and Commissioner Garen are here online. I have a couple things. I had understood that Plan Langston Boulevard was supposed to be completed for June, July, with implementation by the end of the year. You're now looking to merge those into one. You're saying by the end of the third quarter, that means board action in September. That what we're looking at now for that item. So it's really one item. Plan Langston Boulevard needs to be finished.
We certainly are aiming to complete the planning process as soon as we can. We are finishing up digesting a lot of the feedback that we received, pretty extensive feedback from the PCB that was shared, and given a lot of discussion and input that we've heard about interest in, what mechanisms can implement, the vision that we're thinking about. We are exploring that, and we, think that we'll be able to marry that up. But, we still really need some additional conversations internally, but that's what we're targeting right now, is that we would be showcasing the implementation tools along with the plan. Now, whether there's, resounding, unified support for all of that, we'll have to cross that bridge. We're targeting quarter 3 at the moment, and that's going to require getting a draft plan out on the street, this spring so that we can, share that with the community and go through some additional engagement. And, whether the glove tools and the zoning tools are literally, ready for action right at the same time as the plan, or they are just, tracking right behind. I think that's something that, we need to continue to look at.
But you're expecting the actual plan itself, that was forecast to be wrapped up in June, July. Are you still expecting that will be released as scheduled, and then it could be just sit while implementation tools are being fashioned to fit with it? Is that the idea, or are we lagging on the actual plan itself?
Well, I think, again, we want to release the draft plan, and of course, it's going to need to go through the request to advertise and the adoption timeframe. Sitting here right now, I think that that's going to take us into, Q3. So that's July to September. We're aiming for that. And will the implementation be showcased as part of the plan and the strategies? I think that's what we're targeting right now. Whether they are ready for, full action concurrent with the plan, or perhaps, again, lagging behind, I think still puts us at a time frame earlier on the implementation than what we have originally communicated. We, never until really now have we said that we were going to be ready and able to approve implementation tools with the plan. We're trying to bring them closer together.
Thank you. Once that is completed, there's a follow-up that is going to be very much key to the success of the corridor. And that's East Falls Church and Cherrydale, which, originally was scoped to be part of this entire corridor, and then because of resource issues, those two, because they were already planned areas, were pulled out. Nonetheless, they are a key component to the success of certainly meeting affordable housing goals and some other goals. Those communities, I think, are at this point understanding and ready to have them revisited, because the development in both those areas is not really happening as expected and hoped for when those plans were adopted 15, 20, 30 years ago. This is a time, it is actually right that those neighborhoods, I think, are on board for an update. We'll also see what's going down in Falls Church, just across the border from East Falls Church, where there's amazing development that's happening right now. It's very, very active, and East Falls Church is missing out on that. Huge one. That was sort of a shock to the system that it's not working. We really have to start putting into the plan somehow that those to have, and certainly East Falls Church is probably the first priority, just because it's a TOD. There's a lot of developed properties there that are ripe for redevelopment. The existing plan really isn't working properly. And we can get more units out of East Falls Church, including, most importantly, affordable units, than we are out of all the projections, like the 10 years worth of missing middle. So it's not a waste of resource. It's not a nice to do. It's a really key part of reaching our affordable housing goals and reaching the overall county's goals. And it's going to pay off. So I would strongly, strongly urge that somehow we figure a way to get on the calendar the update for the East Falls Church and the Cherrydale area plans. That's the editorial for that. Another thing which has come on the Planning Commission, and Commissioner Weir also has told me that he is on board with this. Well, by the way, that the Arlington Boulevard, Commissioner Patel told me that she endorses that. Moving, or certainly is exploring, if not actually moving toward looking at using a FAR approach to the R districts. And I would also include the RA districts, but moving away from the per unit. And I think it's worth exploring. All of us, the Planning Commission, we've been adding this around, at least a number of us feel that this is a worthwhile thing to do. Other jurisdictions have And we get it's a heavy lift, have moved away from a per unit approach to an FAR approach. I think that given what we've seen this middle and from others, that it probably is time for the county to take that seriously and take a very, very hard look at that. That is something that we recommend, at least I recommend, that we add to the work plan.
I'll associate myself with that.
Commissioner Gearing, you were up next.
Yeah, my only point. I would love to at some point have an update as to the projects that we've approved that don't seem to be moving, like Marriott. I'd just like to know what's happened and if we could expect to see that go forward. I know it won't come back to us, but.
I think in some instances, we'd like to know what's
Oh,
happening as well.
And that's an answer. That's an answer.
Okay,
I do not anticipate any activity on that
Yeah.
until a new purchaser probably rescues it out of foreclosure.
okay.
However, the site plan, assuming the General Assembly acts on another extension, assume that it's going to get some new life for whomever, but we've had absolutely no contact with the out-of-state.
Hearing that is helpful, thank you. And I
Yeah.
just wondered, because they were in
Get
such
asked
a rush
about
to
it.
get that approved, right? Yeah,
I get it.
I know, yeah, we get asked about these
I do.
things, right?
That'd be a shame. That's an urban property for 10 years. It's our gate, literally our gateway.
Yeah.
I mean, someone's gonna buy it.
Yeah, but that team was very enthusiastic.
Oh,
We had
yeah.
high hopes after
Right.
that.
It's too bad it was such a thing with the biofilm.
Yeah, they had great design.
I mean, someone could buy it and still use the design.
Oh, yeah, and that's happening.
Well, it's less likely that it could
Crowd.
happen.
Well, does the site plan stay with it if somebody buys it?
I mean, other than you, very few.
Depends on if that's what they're purchasing.
I think it's usually a 5-year period, right?
That one is actually set to expire this, in July, but again, we're assuming the governor just signs the next extension. It's probably, I forget what the term is, it's probably another 2 years, that's July.
I've known of projects in Arlington that were entitled and then they sat for almost 10, like the Beacon in Clarendon. That, my understanding, flipped like 3 times and then they built it exactly as it was
Aaron,
entitled.
they can last 10 years? They're
Yes,
site
they
plan?
can, if they go back to the board for extensions,
Okay.
or what the General Assembly has been doing since the 2008 recession is they've been routinely granting extensions. So that's why you're not
Okay.
seeing these extension
Yeah.
requests come back to the board.
Right,
That's
thank
in your
you.
site plan condition, right, about the extensions?
Yes,
Right.
they
Yeah.
typically have a 3-year term,
Yeah, that's
but
what I
again, the
thought.
General Assembly action supersedes any local authority for an expiration term.
Commissioner Bagley?
Yeah, I just have I was happy to hear that you are exploring or doing further study on data collection and reporting for ADUs, especially as we're on the doorstep for missing middle. Seems to be a gray area, or too gray, I think, for some of us. So I'm happy to hear that that's moving forward.
Yeah, missing middle is really going to demand a lot of tracking. All of us are going to be extremely interested in seeing how it plays out and what's actually happening on the ground. So a very robust record keeping is going to be vital to this happening. Commissioner Peterson.
My last question was just about your, one of your kind of guiding priorities in creating your work plan was the racial equity lens, which was a newer addition in recent years. So how do you apply that to your projects? How do you measure if it's working? How do you make sure all of your staff are, using that rubric to weave that into their projects? I know I felt like with missing middle, it was something that was consistently throughout the process. But so how do you make sure that's other projects?
Those are all great questions, and I appreciate them. And it's something that we're continuing to, I think I mentioned earlier, staff, a lot of staff training and development going on, focused on racial equity. So each staff member, starting with sort of really the manager and supervisor level, and then ultimately working its way down. But all staff are going through various cohorts of training modules on racial equity. In the planning division, I think we're approaching it from a variety variety of perspectives. I think some of the work we are advancing now, you mentioned missing middle, that's a good example. Multifamily reinvestment, I mean, commercial resiliency, depending on how you like what you're actually looking at it and how you think about its implications. A lot of the work we're advancing, I think there are inherent sort of racial equity opportunities, actually, benefits depending on the missing middle. The staff report was issued both, I think, with the RTA in December, and again for this one, had a racial equity analysis, which really, I think applied a critical and thoughtful look at data and looking at sort of the community conditions and how it relates to the opportunities. So a little bit of work on the long range piece. On the development review side and current planning, something that Aaron has been working closely with his team is on the review of individual site plans and developing the staff report, but then also in negotiating community benefits, really kind of identifying and highlighting, what community benefits might the project be providing that really help advance some of the equity goals, right? Whether it's committed affordable housing, whether it's public improvements, transportation improvements, other community facilities and amenities. So I think we're still in the process of working to establish a more consistent approach to that. But something I'm really excited about is some of the early conversations we've had as a team about this comprehensive plan review looking forward. You all know that how our comprehensive plan is built is basically a compendium or collection of 11, is soon to be 12 individual elements, right? But we have the essential guide, but we don't necessarily have like an overarching kind of element that ties everything together. So in some of our early thinking, we've discussed an opportunity to maybe think about some type of introductory or framework element that can tie everything together. And then also in the process, like really fill in the gap in terms of some really current and timely goals, initiatives, values that are important to the county today that maybe aren't necessarily as evident throughout all of the comp plan as they could be. One of them being racial equity, public health being another, just to give a few examples. So I think we're really thinking holistically about how we can incorporate, how it informs the work that you're seeing on our work program and we'll see on future work programs. And then there's always the community engagement side of it too, which is something we're continuing to explore and improve the process too.
Great support for what you just said. I really support that idea of sort of having a master plan for the comp plan, because I think that's one of the things that's difficult, where when kind of latch onto it as a community member, sometimes it's difficult to see where the hierarchy is or where the priority or how you approach it. So I think that would be wonderful. So I really commend you and staff for thinking of that.
So I think we'll be excited later this year as we get that work underway and can engage, the LRPC and others in, further getting input and feedback into that concept.
Commissioner Steinberger?
In the vein of asking about sort of individual projects, I was the featured guest speaker at the Raycom Civic Association last week or 2 weeks ago, and they asked a lot about a project I wasn't familiar with because I think it had come off the radar at some point, and I was looking for status update. 1616, yeah, anything. I didn't know anything about it.
Yes, so as you're probably aware, I mean, it is on hold at the developer's request.
Okay.
They were responding to some issues that we had or concerns that we asked them to study regarding some road alignments, and I believe that Monument Realty has taken a step back from that project, and they're pursuing other ones that they have in the vicinity. But I would expect it to come back, but they know that they need to address some of our initial concerns first.
Is that the Xerox building?
Excuse me?
Is that the Xerox building?
Yes, it is.
When was that put on hold?
Oh, it's been at least 6 months now, I would say. I believe Monument has a couple other projects that are now getting started, also in the Roslyn metro area.
Had
That
real
was-
problems with the design of that one.
Commissioner Bagley's project.
There were some challenges.
It was, I think it was
Depends on-
yours,
I
and
had
I
a
switched
meeting
you
about
off,
it or
this
not,
one's on
yes,
hold.
Yes,
I didn't even,
The Miami Beach program.
Thank you.
Any other
If you ever
comments?
want access to my spreadsheet, I have a spreadsheet of all.
that'd be really helpful. I would
Yeah,
love that.
Yeah.
Definitely keep doing
Don't
that.
you,
You're
don't you
offering
give
that.
it, don't you give it every, we meet every?
I only filter for you all the ones that are active, coming, preliminary, or coming soon, but there's like 2 more categories.
Yes.
Other comments, questions? I think that's it. Last chance, they're all here. Because of show.
I would be remiss if I didn't thank staff for putting the S3A study on the look ahead. So I know I've been asking about that for a while, so thank you.
Yep. I saw that. First person I thought of, I saw that up there.
Commissioner Gear mentioned it, so.
Okay, if there, do we have any public speakers, Ms. Chapman? Okay, so with that then, I think, and final, Commissioner Weir or Patel, your hands are up, are not up, so I assume you have no further comments. They stay down, I will assume that. Otherwise, I think that we're pretty much wrapping up for the evening. A little bit late, but pretty much. Thank you very much for everybody who showed up, and thank you, Mr. Fusarelli and planning staff. It's been a useful evening, and good luck with the budget
Well,
meeting.
No, thank you, and thanks for all the feedback and input. We will be taking this back. It may not be possible to take everything that was suggested and add it into this year's work program, but we always do kind of, maintain a list that, of items that, can work their way into the work program when the opportunity presents itself. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening, and this meeting is now officially adjourned.